passed from a DC school, and we have several District of Columbia trustees who will be on hand at some point today. So it's, again, just great to have you all interested in politics at your age. I didn't really get into politics until 8th grade, so you guys beat me. I did a report on the presidential campaign of Martin O'Malley. So it's great that you have opportunities to come to events like this. So we've had a great event so far this morning, and we're looking forward to how awesome the next part is going to be. So I'd like to introduce Nevin and Carrie, who are going to help introduce our organization and help us transition to the next part of the event.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Nevin, and I want to welcome you all here today. I am a high school senior in Northern California, and I started with Schools for Climate Action about a year ago when we had just one resolution, and now we're up to over 60. So you guys might be wondering, what exactly do these resolutions do? And we've all learned in science class about climate change and how it might affect our futures. And what these resolutions do is they take those ideas and they put them on paper so that our Congress members know that what students like us, what we want them to do. So I'm really glad that you all made it today. Each one of you totally adds to the whole of our message, and we're more powerful with more students, and we're going to use that power in really good ways to ask Congress to speak up for us. Yeah, so I'm really happy to have you guys here. And now I'm going to introduce Carrie.
Hi everyone. Oh my gosh. You guys are in 6th grade, right? So I'm in 9th grade, so I'm not really that much older than you guys, which is great because that means anybody from any age, from any school can really be a part of this movement. So I want you to sort of think about something that happened to you 3 years ago, since I was in 6th grade 3 years ago. Maybe it was a birthday party that you went to, or a family vacation that you took, something that you remember and was really significant to you. So for me, I live in Nevada, so I live really close to this beautiful lake. It's called Lake Tahoe. It's an alpine lake, so it's really, really cold. Like, don't go swimming for 5 minutes because you'll get your arm frozen off cold. So mine would be going to Lake Tahoe with my family in the summers. But over the past 3 years, this lake that's known for its clarity and its freezing cold temperature, it's warming due to climate change. It has warmed about 6 degrees in the past 3 years, and this was so alarming to me because I realized, oh, climate change is in my very own backyard, and that goes for the same for all of us. That event that you experienced 3 years ago probably wouldn't be the same today as a result of climate change. So I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northern Nevada, which that's my church, and one of our principles is to care for the earth. So I was hooked up with Schools for Climate Action through my church in December, and that just goes to show that inspiration and innovation for your own climate journey can really come from anywhere. You can be a part of any church, any school, any ethnicity, and still be a part of this movement. So thank you all for coming and helping us with our call to action.
So we've had some complications with the schedule, so we'll see a lot of slides that we're skipping right now, but we'll be able to see these later. Welcome, students. So our next section of the event is climate solutions. So we're going to be focusing on ways that members of Congress can come together to really appeal to people of all demographics to get things done on climate change. So we're really fortunate to be joined by Congressman Mike Thompson, a Democrat from the 5th District of California. So he represents a district in Northern California, including Napa, Sonoma, Contra Costa, Lake, and Solano counties. And Congressman Thompson has long been a supporter of environmentalism, sustainability, and climate action. Last year, he received a 100% score from the League of Conservation Voters for his record on climate change and the environment. So we have some other members of Congress stopping by, including Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, Senator Jamie Raskin from Maryland, just canceled on us, And Congresswoman Katie Hill may be stopping by. My phone is ringing right now, so I'm going to get that as soon as I'm done saying this. So their attendance all depends on the vote schedule and the hearing schedule for this week. Right now, they're figuring out appropriations and all the vote schedule. Very complicated. You don't want me to nerd out and talk about it for like another hour. So I'm going to move on. So however, we still do have Congressman Thompson with us here right now. So I first met the congressman when he came to my school in California last year, and I can assure you that he works hard every day to make the lives of young people better. So today we're going to be focusing on one issue in particular that Congressman Thompson is working on, climate change. So I'll ask him some questions in a few minutes, but first I'll let him introduce himself and talk a little bit about his experiences with climate change. Let's give a huge welcome to Congressman Mike Thompson.
Thank you all very much. It's really an honor for me to be here. And Jonah, thank you. Someone asked me earlier today why I'm here, and I said it's real simple. When Jonah says jump, I ask how high. We met, as he said, at his school, where he and some other student leaders put together a day on gun violence prevention. And I'm the chairman of the task force on gun violence prevention here in the House of Representatives. And I went to the school, and I was absolutely impressed with what the students had done. The way they had it set up, the questions, the entire afternoon was phenomenal. And Jonah has since been involved in some things that I do. He's a real student leader, and works sometimes in my office. And I'm real impressed with you, Jonah, and your colleagues. And I know that that term colleague spreads wider than just your school, because I know that all the student leaders here today are bringing a lot to this issue, and that's important. You do, as Jonah said, you do have the most at stake. You're going to inherit whatever mess we've created, and you're going to have to figure that out and live with it. So the fact that you are plugged in now is incredibly important. It's impressive, the resolutions that you've had different bodies pass, bringing this to their attention. I think the answer lies in the involvement of our student leaders across the country. We're seeing it with gun violence. We saw it in the civil rights movement. We saw it in getting the United States out of the Vietnam War. Students have a voice. You speak, your parents listen, your community listens, your involvement is incredibly important. So thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me. And before I leave, I want to get a picture, because whenever Jonah told you we met when I visited his school, whenever I visit a school in my district and I post it on my Facebook, there's 4 or 5 people, they're always the same 4 or 5, who accuse me of brainwashing the students. They're out there brainwashing the students. So I'm going to take a picture of all of us together. I'm going to post it and let them know that today I was being brainwashed by our students, just to watch their heads explode. So thank you very, very much.
So today we're also thrilled to have Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from the great state of Rhode Island with us today. So we've, as we've obviously hoped for this panel, he's long been a champion of environmental issues, pushing for renewable energy, wildlife, nature, wetland and ocean protections, and overall climate action. Senator, so far to catch you up, we've just had our panel with some of our climate and child welfare experts. So we'll ask some questions in a bit, but I believe you've prepared something to just talk with our audience a little bit and kind of warm them up.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. As we've seen from the television, young people across Europe have really changed the conversation on climate change. And we actually see that happening in the US again through the strikers that joined our European young friends, and through groups like Sunrise that are helping to organize and push. So thank you so much for what you're doing. let me give you a number, all right? $700 billion. $700 billion. That is a 7, and if I count this right, 11 zeros. So it is a big, big number. That is the amount of money, $700 billion, that the International Monetary Fund, which is a very technical, economic, not environmental group, says the fossil fuel industry enjoys by way of a subsidy every year in the United States of America. So let's just pretend that you all are the fossil fuel industry for a minute. And you're getting $700 billion a year in subsidies showered down on you every year. And you have to come to this building to lobby and to put election pressure on people. How hard do you think you'd be willing to fight to protect that $700 billion a year benefit to you? Put yourself in their shoes. How hard would you be willing to fight? What tricks would you be willing to get up to? How would you be willing to engage in elections and influence and lobbying, right? So that's a little bit of what we're up against. Now, here's the advantage that we have. Most of the companies who are behind this nonsense know that it is not popular. Even ExxonMobil, right now, at the CEO level, will say, you know what, climate change is real, and our product is causing it, and we support a price on carbon. That's what they will say. Here's what they will do. They will then send out front groups, like something called the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that's just one of many, and they will quietly move around Congress and tell members of Congress, if you dare to support a price on carbon, we are coming after you. Don't believe what the CEO is saying. That's stuff they have to say. Believe us, we will come after you if you try to do anything about climate change. And the U.S. Chamber enjoys the status of being the biggest spender of what we call dark money in politics. You can't trace it back to who contributed it. It's anonymous political money. We've got a pretty good sense of where it goes. We've got a pretty good sense it goes back, as my son would say, duh, to the fossil fuel industry. But the front group is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So are there things we can do about all this pressure and all this power and all this influence that they're bringing to bear? Well, there's some really interesting companies that also support the U.S. Chamber. And you buy their products. So they're interested in your point of view. Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, the Band-Aid people, Procter & Gamble, who make all kinds of soaps and products in your houses, Marriott, the hotel chain, Yum Brands. You like Taco Bell, you like KFC, you like Pizza Hut? That's them. Campbell Soup, Gap, Kroger, Target, Google, Facebook. You start asking those companies to knock it off and to tell that trade association group, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to knock it off, it will make a difference. There are things you can do. And just being here matters. Just those kids showing up across Europe and getting out in the street mattered. So keep it up. And as the congressman said, keep brainwashing us, because we need a little washing around here. They call it Washington, but we need a wash. Thank you.
All right. Use this mic. Turn it off. There we go. So, Thank you both. And now we're going to move into some questions. So we've heard many proposals from how to deal with climate change from both parties. And if the computer will work, then we can see that I skipped the slide. We can see that the theme of our panel today is climate solutions. So really, how can we all come together to make a difference? Because climate change affects all Americans. It's really happening, and it should be a nonpartisan common sense issue, right? We all should be able to say, this shouldn't be happening, what can we do about it? So we've heard many proposals to deal with climate change from both parties, which is really great now, because before we were just hearing from one party that climate change was happening and we should do something about it, and from the other party we were hearing it doesn't exist. And now we're starting to hear, okay, from that other party, okay, maybe climate change does exist, but I don't think we need to do anything about it. So right now we're really getting into it because we're starting to see this shift into now it's debating not if we should do something, but what we should do. So we're really going to see, I think, in the next few months, real work across the aisle from both parties to get stuff done. So one of the most well-known proposals seems to be the Green New Deal, introduced by New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the House and Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey in the Senate. So first, I have a question for all of you in the audience. So show of hands, how many of you have heard of the Green New Deal? All right, you guys are politically involved. Anyone here, maybe of our younger group, think they can tell the rest of the group, just a couple sentences, what it is? Yeah, it's on. Yeah, so just in a short phrase, and obviously it does more than this, but moves our economy to 100% renewable energy. So that's away from fossil fuels and towards solar and wind and hydro, stuff like that. So Congressman Thompson is a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, so my first question is going to be for him. So Congressman, what can you tell us about the Green New Deal and your support of it?
Well, I'm in support of dealing with climate change. The Green New Deal has been heralded by some as the answer to all of our woes, and by others as the beginning of the end, because it's going to move us down some socialistic path and require everybody to tear their house down and rebuild it, do away with all airplanes and cars. The truth of the matter is, the Green New Deal is a resolution. It's not a law that we would pass. It's a resolution that states certain principles, and those principles are stated that describe how we get to a place where climate change is no longer the issue that it is today. It's bold and it's aspirational, and I co-authored that bill because I believe at this time we need to be bold and we need to be aspirational. And if we surrender aspiration to apathy, we are going to be doomed. It is important for us to make a strong statement. It's important for us to do everything we can to reverse the direction in which climate change is taking us. Will we get rid of all cars? No. Will we get rid of all airplanes? No. Will we tear down all of our buildings and homes and rebuild them? No. But going forward, we need to be able to put together transportation plans, living plans that move us to a better place environmentally. And I think this is the start of doing that.
All right, thank you, Congressman. So another piece, my mic is on. Another piece of proposed legislation is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019. So this bill proposes a carbon fee that is placed on coal, oil, or natural gas as it enters the U.S. economy. So the fee starts at $15 per metric ton of CO2 and it increases by $10 every year until emissions are reduced by 90%. All the money is then recycled to American residents in equal monthly carbon dividends, helping consumers adapt while businesses compete to reduce their carbon footprints. Unlike the Green New Deal, Congressman Thompson, who just had to step out for his vote, has not sponsored that. So my next question then would be for Senator Whitehouse is, do you believe that legislation such as the EICDA has a real chance of passing in either this Congress or the next one?
I do think it has a real chance of passing. It makes enormous common sense. And it's the solution that Republicans who aren't subject to fossil fuel industry political pressure, like former congressmen or former cabinet members or sincere think tank groups, have all come to. So it provides the best prospect for the heart of a bipartisan solution. The other thing you can do is you can predict what an effect it will have on carbon emissions. And by dialing it up in terms of a higher charge for polluting, or dialing it down with a lower charge for polluting, you can affect how much pollution takes place. And that's really important to solving this problem. I'm still targeting 1.5 degrees centigrade as the level of heat increase in our planet beyond which it's dangerous. So we need to try to stay under that if we can. We've already lost a full degree of that, so we've got to work pretty fast, and that means bipartisanship will help. The reason that the carbon fee is so important is if you could think about it this way, if you had two factories and they were side by side and they were making the same product and the same river ran by both factories, and one factory was able to take all of its waste and all of its junk and all of its garbage and dump it in the river, and the other factory paid to clean up its junk and its waste and its trash and to make sure it was properly disposed of, who would win in the market? The one that was polluting for free, right? Because they could make their product cheaper, because they don't have to pay for all that cleanup cost. And that basically is where that $700 billion number comes from. So you've got to adjust that so that real clean energy has a fair shot at competing with polluting energy. And that's where this carbon price comes in. And that's, I think, why sincere Republicans have to accept it. Because they basically believe in market economics. And it ain't fair market economics when you've got one factory dumping everything in the river and the other factory next door protecting the river and paying to be clean. So that's where this comes in, and it's, I would argue that there are a lot of ways to solve the climate change dilemma, and that we need to work on a big bill that does a lot of different things. But I will argue that a big bill that does a lot of things but doesn't have a carbon price can't work. There's a phrase, necessary, if not sufficient, and I think putting a price on carbon is necessary. It may not be sufficient. There may be other things we need to do, and we need to start that conversation in Washington. But you have to put the price on carbon for this to work.
Some environmental groups have been wary of this legislation because some of the language prevents new forms of regulations for 10 years. What are your thoughts on amending this to remove this block on new regulations?
We have not put in any restriction on new regulations. We know from dealing with people we talk with on the other side that they would like to see two things. One, they'd like to see regulations knocked off as the price of moving to this market solution. And two, they'd like to have their fossil fuel friends protected from all the lawsuits that have come up to sue them. A, for the mess that they've made, and B, for the untrue things that they have told about the mess that they have made. So we don't have either of those things in the bill. Now, there may come a time, if it makes the deal work, where you could say, if we put a price on carbon, we don't need the transport rule any longer, the interstate transport rule. Or we could say that this knocks down mercury emissions so much more than existing mercury emissions regulations that we actually don't need mercury regulations any longer. But that's a conversation that we have to have on the facts. And it has to be proven that in fact we are actually improving conditions for the downwind states with respect to the transport. Transport rules, when one state puts up pollution and it lands on another. I'm from Rhode Island. Guess what we are? Downwind, right? So Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, they put it up, comes over, it lands on us. So we care a lot about the transport rule. But if this will beat the transport rule, I'll make that deal. If this is better on mercury emissions than the mercury emissions rule, I'm willing to discuss that. But it's got to be fact-based, and it's got to be an improvement for the downwind states and for the people who are on the receiving end of the mercury and all of that. But I'm not going to have that conversation with anybody yet until I've got somebody to negotiate with. And at the moment, the Republicans are still all in their hidey hole, refusing to negotiate, except for maybe 3 members of the House. I'm sure not going to negotiate against myself. Good.
All right. So then, a lot of what Schools for Climate Action has done is pass resolutions that define climate change as a generational justice issue, and that it disproportionately affects our generation and future generations in a way that other generations haven't been affected. Could you comment on this a little bit, especially in terms of climate inaction being a form of child neglect?
Yes, it is. This is clearly a generational justice problem. We are enjoying a carbon polluting economy whose costs are going to come for you and going to come for your children and going to come for their children. We see this in a technical thing. This gets a little technical, but there's a thing called a discount rate. So if I'm going to give you $1,000 today, or I'm going to give you $1,000 10 years from now, which do you want? You want it today, right? And if I say, well, I'm going to give you $1,000 10 years from now, how much would I have to raise that $10,000 10 years from now for you to take it today as a deal instead of just getting $1,000? Would you do it for $3,000 or $10,000 or $20,000? Would you take $20,000 10 years from now instead of $1,000 today?
Yes.
Yeah? So that's the discount rate, right? It's 20 to 1 if you do $20,000. That's basically a nutshell version. But here's the problem with a discount rate in this circumstance. It's not just one deal. This is like people who are not in the deal. They're going to take the whole hit. So what the Trump EPA is doing right now is putting a big discount rate so that they're taking the harm to the future and discounting it down to almost nothing, which is fine for people right now, perhaps, but once that future comes, you're getting hit 100%. So there's something morally wrong with using the discount rate the way they are. And they've actually baked that into their proposal. So we have to undo that, and we've got to expand the conversation to what is right and what is moral. And it is morally wrong to be putting that kind of a discount rate on kids.
All right, I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then we're going to open it up to you all if you have any questions for Senator Whitehouse. So historical congressional inaction on climate has already exposed young Americans and future generations to increased climate harm and risk. Much of this inaction is caused by climate denial and climate confusion concentrated but not exclusive to the Republican Party. Fortunately, the Republican Party has now officially acknowledged human caused or anthropogenic climate change, and many Republican members embrace robust responses to climate change. However, climate delay and climate confusion persist in the Republican Party. What can be done to empower Republican climate champions to bring climate confused members into the moderate mainstream?
I don't think that confusion is the issue here. I think that political pressure is the issue here. And the fossil fuel industry has developed an enormously powerful and often secret army to apply political pressure to Congress. They've done it very effectively. They've done it for a very long time. They've been doing it so long that there are actually scientists who study what they're doing. They call it the climate denial apparatus. And they actually study it. It's a thing. And that is still at work. And as soon as that stops working, or as soon as these other companies, like the ones I mentioned, show up and tell people in Congress, hey, we're not putting up with the fossil fuel guys pushing you around like this, we will have your back. When they come after you, because you supported a price on carbon, we will support you. Now it's a fair fight. But they're not showing up. The good companies are not showing up in Congress. And very often the groups that they support, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are actually arguing against any climate solution. So if you want to think of politics as kind of a push back and forth between opposing forces, there's a lot of push, $700 billion protecting worth of push from the fossil fuel industry, and almost no push on the other side. That's starting to change, thank goodness, and that's starting to be reflected in this tiny, infinitesimal little bit of Republican acknowledgement and support that we are seeing, and we hope to grow that. But it's really, I think, going to take a lot of public pressure on them to move so that the hydraulics move to the middle, and now we have a fair fight again. Can I tell you a quick story? I got elected in 2006. I got sworn in 2007. In 2007, in 2008, and in 2009, there were bipartisan climate bills all over the Senate. I think there were 5 of them by my count, kicking around. We had bipartisan hearings on climate. We had these bipartisan bills on climate. We had bipartisan discussions on climate. And then something happened. In January of 2010, the United States Supreme Court decided that big industries would now be free to spend unlimited amounts of money in politics. The decision was called the Citizens United decision. And the fossil fuel industry instantly took advantage of it. And what they did was they went to the Republican Party and they said, anybody crosses us on this, we're getting rid of them. And there's a guy named Bob Inglis, who was a former congressman who you may hear from, who was one of the people they got rid of. And that stopped dead all bipartisan conversation for now pretty much a decade. And now it's just beginning to reemerge. But I can think back to 2007, 2008, and 2009 when there were robust discussions between Republicans and Democrats on climate in the Senate. And the artificial difference was the fossil fuel industry being able to use unlimited money and pressure to knock bipartisanship off. And now time and facts and other pressures is starting to reemerge. But we can do this. I know that because I have seen it already happening. We just have to be able to constrain the fossil fuel industry's efforts or counter them. I've lived this. We could have had this fixed by now if it weren't for that.
What advice do you have for young people who want to fight for what they believe in?
Be heard. be visible, talk to your parents. I think the ones who are here in this room probably get it, so you probably don't need to work them over too hard. When there are youth events, like the strikes in Europe and across the country in many places, find a way to support them if you can't strike yourself. Find a way to get onto Facebook or to tweet to your friends that we should, be aware of what other kids are doing. Have your parents support you in doing that and getting the message out. You are very important voices. And the more you are doing things that come together in a particular day or a particular moment, the more powerful that voice is. I was in the Women's March right after the election. What a turnout that was. And what made the difference wasn't just that so many women were angry and wanted to be heard, but they chose that day and that moment to all come together and all get out there and do it. And that made it super visible and super consequential. So look for those moments and jump in either with actions in your school, with actions among your friends, or on social media to support and participate. I'm getting the hook from the back. One last. I'll take one question from the audience and then I'll scoop. Yes, right there.
Me?
Yeah.
First, I would like to say that I really love you. I've been to watch your floor speeches and your TED Talk. I think is the best TED Talk ever made.
I doubt that, but you're really nice to say so, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I would just like to ask, you were talking about Citizens United.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be necessary to at least attempt to repeal this or reverse this Supreme Court decision in order to get any real substantial action on climate change?
It would help to reverse the decision or override the decision, but we have a constitutional amendment to do it, so it's a long, hard road. The easier road is to require disclosure, transparency of political spending. So the fossil fuel industry could still spend unlimited money, but everybody would know that that was fossil fuel industry money. What happened after Citizens United, first you start that it's bad enough that a big industry can spend unlimited money, right? That's just naturally unfair because it only helps the industries that have unlimited money and everybody else can't compete. So it's a big advantage, big one-sided advantage. So that's pretty bad. Then you make it worse, because now these big industries can hide what they are doing. And they set up front groups with funny names like Americans for Puppies and Peace and Prosperity. I mean, I'm joking, but that's kind of the idea. And then the money comes through that phony front group and nobody knows any longer that it's the fossil fuel industry. It's like looking at a play without knowing who the characters are. It's really hard to figure it out. Plus, for folks watching TV, it looks really weird to have an entity that you've never heard of and you know makes no product up on your TV telling you that somebody is good or bad or otherwise in politics. So you get rid of that dark money spending, and I would bet you that 2/3 of the fossil fuel spending goes away right away. Because they only get away with it because they can hide that it's them. And of course, when you diminish the big money, you make a big difference in bringing democracy back to our country, and you take away the sneakiest part of all. This is the part the Supreme Court completely overlooked. If you are a big industry, and you are allowed to spend unlimited money in politics, particularly if you're allowed to hide that it's you while you spend unlimited money in politics, what else can you do? You can threaten to do that, can't you? If you can do it, you can threaten to do it. And if you can do it, you can promise to do it. And those threats and promises have two big advantages for the industry. One, they're a secret. You just go to the politicians and say, if you cross us, you're dead. And nobody ever sees that the way they'd see an ad, even if it's hidden behind Americans for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity. And the second thing is, you don't even actually have to spend the money. It's free to make the threat and the promise once you've been given that club. So you put a spotlight, you put sunlight, the great cleansing agent of politics, on all of that, and we come into balance much, much, much more quickly. That's a great question, a great point to end on. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for your passion on this. I really admire you.
All right, so now we're going to kind of transition back. We had to skip over some stuff for the senators and congressmen this time. So we're going to go back to our first panel with some climate change experts and children's welfare experts. So I'd like to bring out Lynn Cherry, for those of you who weren't here before. We have Park coming up. Oh, never mind. We have Lynn Cherry, who is the founder and director of Young Voices for the Planet. They are co-sponsoring this event, so it's really thanks to them that you all are here right now. Cool. We also have partnered today with the Center for Environmental Filmmaking at American University. So if you see the camera, don't look in it. But it's really awesome that they're here. So thank you to Professor Stogner for being here and bringing your students here today. You guys are going to be famous among college students at one school. If we just want to transition back, we can welcome up our panel and our next student speaker.
Sixth grade, you can come and sit up front.
Welcome to all our new students. If you just want to file in, sit at the front. We'll get started in a second. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you all for coming today. Really wasn't that a treat to actually hear from Senator Whitehouse? He's a real climate hero. I don't know if any of you saw, but he gave a filibuster on the floor of the House for days on end about climate change. He's very passionate about it. Okay, so our next presenter will be focusing on a psychological and mental health perspective. Katie Hayes is a PhD candidate at the Dalalana School of...
Izzy's gonna go first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, okay, sorry. Scrap that. Our next speaker is Izzy Ryan, a senior at Sonoma Academy in Santa Rosa, California. Izzy is a sustainability student leader at SA and attended Sustainability Summer at Dartmouth. Izzy will be speaking today about the experience of losing her home in a climate-influenced wildfire. Thank you.
In 2017, I lost my home in the Sonoma County Tubbs fire. As I evacuated my home with my family and pets, a part of me thought, well, isn't this quite the adventure? There was actually something thrilling about driving through flames on 101 North. Maybe it was a calming tactic, or maybe it was my brain trying to distract me from the reality, but I wasn't initially afraid. It wasn't until the initial emergency was behind us that I had actually felt the enormity of what we had just been through. I wouldn't have actually believed that such a disaster could have hit so close to home. Living through the Tubbs fire definitely changed my perspective on natural disasters. They're real. They aren't just on TV or occurring in some far distant place. We are all affected. More recently, I've begun to reflect on the extent to which we can work to mitigate human impact to the environment. I've come to realize that events that may seem like acts of nature are also contributed by humans. Beyond the material loss, the fires caused a lot of destruction and dismay in the hearts of many of my close family and friends. The fires happened during my junior year of high school, which is arguably the most stressful year of high school. The timing of the fires for me was especially brutal. During this time, I was studying for the SATs, taking several AP classes, and starting to research colleges. Although I'm still getting over the fact that I lost my home, the impact that the fires had were more mentally tough on me more than anything. I have seen the brutal physical impacts that the Tubbs fires had on my community, but I've also seen the devastating impacts it has had on the mental health of so many of my close family and friends. I'm very lucky to be able to say that my family had the insurance to be able to replace our old home, but I know that so many others were not fortunate enough to do the same. After learning that my house was, in fact, taken by the fires, I remember my dad telling me that this won't be the last time I will be experiencing the effects of a natural disaster. He was right. Just a year later, my school was closed yet again for 2 days due to the terrible air quality from the Butte County fires, which were over 100 miles away. My school was very fortunate enough to have had the resources to install air quality detectors, but I know that many public schools probably can't afford the same. I cannot believe that such a disastrous wildfire had struck yet again, and this time more destructive, and only about a year after the Tubbs fires in Sonoma. What has been the hardest part of this whole experience for me is the fact that these mega fires are not just bad luck, so to speak. Living with huge wildfires and other natural disasters is the new reality. And the worst part of this is that the impacts and degree of those wildfires are only going to become worse and worse as global warming increases. It is no longer a matter of if a wildfire or another natural disaster is going to happen, but when. As a student, I understand that the impacts these fires have, whether direct or not, can take a huge, serious toll on the mental health of individuals in the greater community. It is overwhelming at times to look at the threats to our environment. But at the same time, my evolving perspective gives me hope that my generation can have the wisdom, knowledge, and inspiration to exert some control over the future of our planet. Thank you.
So sorry you had to go through that, Izzy, but thanks for sharing with us. So our next expert presenter will be focusing on the psychological and mental health perspective. Katie Hayes is a PhD candidate at the Dalai Lama School of Public Health and the University of Toronto, in the Social Behavioral Health Sciences Division. She's also a contractor for Health Canada's Climate Change and Innovation Bureau. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this, and thanks for all the students for being here. I really appreciate to see all of these wonderful smiling faces and talking about mental health. So we're going to talk about some of the hopeful items at the end, but I really want to paint a picture for you. And first, I really want to take the opportunity to thank Izzy for sharing her personal story. Experiences like what Izzy describes are becoming our new normal. As a researcher studying climate change and mental health, I can tell you that there are a whole host of complicated mental health outcomes related to climate change. As Izzy notes, there can be these complicated feelings of a thrilling sense of being alive as you're navigating safety and security during an extreme event. And then as our basic needs are met, the mental health needs become harder to navigate. It is important to consider that climate change impacts can have latent effects. So that means they have delayed effects. So for many who have been exposed to a specific climate event, like a flood, a hurricane, or a wildfire, their immediate needs may be to get security, shelter, food, water, safety, and meet up with their families. Once this sense of security has been established, needs may be focused on rebuilding. And after that rebuilding is underway, people start to tend to their mental health needs. The research on climate change and mental health reveals that these needs can be things like post-traumatic stress disorder after experiencing the devastating effects of floods or hurricanes, or anxiety every time it rains, or every time the sky clouds with smoke from wildfires.
toward grief, anxiety, and a general sense of hopelessness as we bear witness to extreme event after extreme event that devastates our communities at an alarming rate. We know that climate change loads the dice, so to speak, making these extreme events more frequent, complex, and intense. While these mental health outcomes that I've mentioned can affect all of us at any time, these outcomes disproportionately affect our youth. Children and youth tend to be at the greatest risk to the mental health effects of climate change because they're more dependent on their adults in their lives for supporting their mental health and well-being. Research suggests that children are more at risk to experiencing long-term trauma, including post-traumatic stress disorder, after experiencing an event. Research conducted in my home country of Canada reveals the devastating mental health outcomes related to the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfires in Alberta. Researchers found that mental health symptoms and substance addiction are significantly higher for youth who experience the wildfires compared to controls in the neighboring community. Of more than 3,252 youth who participated in this study, researchers found significant increases in depression, suicidal thinking, and increased tobacco use amongst youth from Fort McMurray. Further, feelings of impending doom also appear to be prevalent among children. A survey of Australian children, for example, noted that 1 in 4 were so concerned about the global threat of climate change that they believed the world would end before they reached adulthood. Increasingly, our children and youth are feeling the weight of climate change on their shoulders. Like, for example, Zane Cowie, a 9-year-old climate activist from New York, who wrote a compelling children's book for adults called Goodbye Earth. This book calls out all of us adults who have been cripplingly inactive on addressing climate change. Our youth have lived their whole lives hearing about the dire consequences of climate change, and increasingly they've been directly exposed to climate hazards like floods, extreme heat waves, wildfires, and hurricanes. This can spark fear, anxiety, distress, and trauma. Our youth are also watching many of the adults in the world remain silent and in a state of inaction on the issue. They believe that nothing is being done to protect the earth that they will inherit. They see that nothing is being done to protect their homes and livelihoods from the increasing frequency and intensity of these events, and they see that nothing is being done to protect them. They are being kept indoors during heat waves and when the air is thick with wildfire smoke. We are preventing our kids from being kids. Our youth are here today to demand action. In the words of a wonderful young leader, Greta Thunberg, the youth don't want our hope, they want us to act. This is an opportune time to really listen to the wise voice of our youth, to all of you in the room, to come together, to do more, to protect them now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just want to remind all of you young people in this room that it can be depressing, but the antidote to any kind of feeling sad or hopeless is action. And action is the antidote to this fear and demoralization. Action makes you feel fine, really gonna make a difference. Okay. So our next speaker is Celeste Palmer, a junior at Montgomery High School in Santa Rosa, California. She's the Schools for Climate Action lead advocate for Santa Rosa schools, who passed one of our first resolutions for Schools for Climate Action. She'll be speaking about her experiences during the 2017 Santa Rosa fires and congressional neglect on younger generations. Celeste, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank all Congress members and staff in this, for your leadership on many of the most pressing issues of the past and present. One afternoon in October 2017, a group of fire evacuees and I were walking around the Santa Rosa Equestrian Center, where my mom works. The air was heavy and smelled of burnt plastic. We were at the Equestrian Center in particular because being surrounded with irrigated pastures, we figured the chance that it would catch on fire was low. The bushes were filled with pieces of burnt paper from the Tubbs fire. In fact, here are two I collected. One piece of paper that struck me the most, which I unfortunately could not collect because somebody else collected it and then showed it to me, was a kid's drawing of a house and with a family, and the words "Home Sweet Home" written underneath it in like 6-year-old's handwriting. That child lost their home, which was most likely situated in a neighborhood called Coffee Park, not far from where I lived at the time. We stand here today at the most critical time in human history. We stand here today at the precise moment when our society is to decide what our future will look like and whether we will have one at all. I am talking, of course, about our decision on the most critical of issues, man-made climate change. As all of you already know, if not addressed immediately, climate change will have apocalyptic effects on the environment, the economy, our national security, and society itself. Unfortunately, this institution, Congress, has so far yet to act appropriately on climate change, an issue that is not even one of the far future. In fact, we are already suffering from the effects of it now. By procrastinating and pretending the future of your children is a partisan problem, Congress has neglected my generation. Congress is acting like a middle schooler who avoids studying for a final exam. I, as well as my peers, are regularly worried and anxious about our future. But who can blame us when we might witness a time when our environment is destroyed, where the places we live in are either flooding, burning, or in a drought, where endless waves of climate refugees cause war and chaos. But who can blame us if we are cast into a future where our entire economic system and the stability of our society is threatened, and at the same time, we are forced to watch politicians value the fossil fuel industry over our livelihoods. Congressional support of this destructive industry is killing us. So now we panic at a time way overdue. As Congress, who at the moment are some of the most powerful people in the country, if not the world, make a decision on our future and the future of humanity. And so far, Congress's legacy is their failure to act. Thank you all for listening.
I hope that all of you young people will watch the Young Voices for the Planet films, because they're 13 stories, they're success stories of youth solutions, and you'll see that young people can change laws, they can change people's minds, they can change the world. And this is what we're doing with Schools for Climate Action. I think having that evidence that your actions really can make a difference is really important. So,
Well, our middle schoolers, Lynn is giving you all homework, you have to watch videos.
so our next presenter is focusing on the classroom teacher perspective. Park Guthrie is a 6th grade teacher at Salmon Creek Charter School in Occidental, California. He's also the co-founder and lead volunteer for Schools for Climate Action. And this all started with Park. Thank you, Park. Park and his kids.
We actually have a very special treat today. Assistant Speaker of the House, Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico, is here So if he wants to address all of you, he can somehow find his way up.
Well, that's a very generous offer. Absolutely. Well, I apologize for delaying the panel today. How's everyone doing? Yeah, I hear a lot of energy as you're walking around Capitol Hill and you're making sure that you're engaging with members of Congress from all across America, right? You're bringing all of the knowledge that you have of the importance and the urgency of the matter that we have to attend to, right? Well, I'll tell you, I had the honor of being able to come down today at the invitation of Harlan. Harlan, who's an incredible student and leader out of the state of New Mexico from the Santa Fe Indian School. I appreciate his invitation and his attention, not just to the information that he is sharing with us in the New Mexico delegation, with members of the House and members of the Senate. But I can also tell you, as someone who served as a public utility commissioner, who has committed his life to making sure that we're generating more power from the sun and from the wind, that we're being smarter about how we're building facilities, energy efficiency, rooftop solar, making sure that we're doing something real about pollution, that we're changing not just what we do in America, but that we are trying to influence what's happening around the world, making sure that the President of the United States understands that we should be part of the Paris Climate Accord, not walking away from the Paris Climate Accord. I also had the honor of being appointed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and I'm serving under Congresswoman Kathy Castor, who is the chairwoman on our Select Committee on Climate Crisis. We actually had our organizing meeting today. So as we travel across the country and we're holding field hearings in your home districts, if you get a chance, come on over, participate, share what's happening, share your perspective, and don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. That's nonsense. Step up, organize, attend town halls, ask tough questions, be prepared. Understand the magnitude of the power of your voice when it comes to social media. Spread that and connect with people around the globe, because it's going to be you and your generation that forces everyone else to do the right thing, to make sure that we do what's right, that we take this seriously, that we understand the climate crisis is real, the climate change is hurting not just us in America, it's hurting you, it's hurting our families, and we can do something real about this, and it starts with you. Thank you for your conviction and for your passion and for understanding that your voice does matter and that you will change the world. Don't give up, keep moving, and make us do the right thing. Thank you, everybody.
That's a tough act to follow, but Mark, go for it.
We're running a little bit over, so I'm gonna skip some slides. But I just want to say that sixth graders, everything that you saw was actually really for the members of Congress and their staffers. We actually we're gonna have you listen to the members of Congress talk about solutions. So we were the really doom and gloom stuff. We were trying to lay that onto the members of Congress to get them to get a little more energy under finding solutions. But it is a real problem, and it's heavy for everybody, and it's one of the reasons why we haven't taken care of it yet. It's not because we're bad people. We love you tremendously. It's a tough thing for everyone. Nobody wants it to be this way. And what happens is when people don't talk about it, then the polite silence or the tendency to distract ourselves and to focus on other things, we just start getting in that habit, and then our institutions get in that habit, and suddenly there's a wall of silence that all of a sudden means that we're supporting this thing that we don't want to support. And so that's an incredibly hopeful part from all of this, is that your ability to break the silence. I kid you not, it is the silence more than anything that's allowing this to happen. And I'm going to give you some examples. The California School Boards Association is an incredible organization, and it fights for schools, and it fights for equity in the classrooms, and it's some of the greatest advocates in our state for kids, and they do tremendous things. In June of 2018, my son Kai and I had an advocacy meeting with the California Association of School Boards, because we had started passing these resolutions, and essentially what we're doing is we're trying to manage the pure social norms of education leaders. And right now there's a pure social norm for climate justice silence. Inside the hearts of 70% of school board members in our country, there is a cry of grief stuck in their throats, and they're holding it inside themselves privately. And what happens in cases like that is that they don't realize that 70% of the school board members also have that same sadness inside them, and so they think, oh, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about this heavy thing, so I'm just not going to talk about it, and then that creates what's called a spiral of silence, and nobody's talking about it, and all of a sudden we've got this climate change thing, and the 90,000 school board members who are officially those adults with a singular focus on the well-being and success of young people, and they're not talking about this great thing. And it's all because there's this silence. And that our campaign is designed to help break that silence, and all of a sudden be the first one to say climate change is hurting our kids, and to be the first one to say it in a school board meeting, or you can extend that pattern and be the first one to say it in your city council meeting. And you could be the first kid to go and talk to some of the members of Congress here and say climate change is a generational justice issue. And so when Kai and I went to the California Association of School Boards in June of 2018, and I asked, do you have a program that measures climate change impacts on California schools and students? The staffer there sort of had an ironic laugh and said, we don't, and if we did, we could not use the words climate change. We could not use the words climate change around here. Those words are considered too controversial. This is California Association of School Boards. They have some of the most progressive climate literacy programs. They have intra-district sustainability programs that are awesome, and they're bringing down greenhouse gas emissions. So these people believe in climate change, and they know it's happening, and yet somehow they've consented to a polite silence about this very heavy matter. And their silence is actually helping to perpetuate this dynamic of neglect. I almost could not believe the words I was hearing from that staffer, and sure enough, I went back and I read a 7-page article they wrote about the Santa Rosa fires that took Izzy's home, the Santa Rosa fires that Celeste described to you. And in their 8-page description of those fires, the words climate change were never mentioned. And so inadvertently, the California Association of School Boards is co-opted into being a silent witness to this neglect, and inadvertently, their silence is protecting this unscientific worldview that allows it to happen. I've seen this dynamic over and over again. The California Association of School Boards is a great organization, and I feel confident that they are going to break the silence, that they are going to help flip the pure social norm among education leaders. So it's really about changing social norms. The National Council, the National Black Council of School Board Members, talking about flipping pure social norms. The National Black Council of School Board Members, within 1 week of learning of this campaign, 1 week, they said, you're absolutely right. We need to be speaking up for our kids. And they passed a resolution. They didn't have to think very hard about it. The Salmon Creek Climate Action Middle School. Dax, Luca, stand up. Dax and Luca, right there. They made one phone call to the executive director of the California Association of School Psychologists and said, you know what's happening? You're a mandated reporter, please speak up for us. The ED said, okay, I'll have a Zoom meeting with you. 5 minutes into the Zoom meeting, the executive director said, you're absolutely right. We're gonna pass a climate action resolution. And so the California Association of School Psychologists passed a climate action resolution. And they didn't have to think about it very hard. The National Association of School Boards, right now today, is considering a climate action resolution. We better pass it. So your voices are very important. The National Association of School Psychologists right now does not understand. We invited them to meet with us while we were here. And they gave us a polite reply and they said, no, we won't meet with you because we only deal with issues that have a direct impact on schools and student mental health. And this is the association that is going to Congress. They lobby Congress all the time and they talk to Congress about what is good for kids. And they talk about what is good for kids' mental health. And they do tremendous work. The National Association of School Psychologists are great advocates for kids. They've done incredible stuff with mental health crises and suicide prevention. They are a great organization. But there's inadvertently, they are a silent witness to this. And their silence allows climate disengaged members of Congress to perpetuate the neglect on this generation. It's not the only cause, but it's part of the dynamic. And you today could go home and get with your teachers and organize a Zoom meeting or even meet in person with the executive director of the National Association of School Psychologists and teach them what you just learned here today. And my guess is that my guess is they'll agree with you and they'll pass a resolution. There are 75,000 education sector organizations in this country. Right now, 63 of them have spoken up. There are 90,000 school board members in this country. 0.005% of them have spoken up. So there's tons of low-hanging advocacy fruit out there. And all you have to do is just make a Zoom meeting, call them up, send an email, and you can help generate this landslide, this signal, this incredible signal from young people, from the ag sector that's going to move Congress to act. Okay, thank you.
We're going to skip through part of slides. We had some fun last night making this.
I also wanted to thank some other people here. Some really important people here. Maggie Stogner, can you raise your hand if Maggie is here? Maggie is the executive director of the American University Department of Environmental Filmmaking. And there are, I see a lot of filmmakers here. Here they are. These are AU students, is that right? All, yes, yeah, and all American University students, and they're filming this, and hopefully we'll make a movie of this day, and feature, and also some young voices from the Planet Films about some of the young people who we've been hearing from today. So we can do a movie about this, the Schools for Climate Action resolutions. I'd also like to thank Ned, the 6th grade teacher, who took the day off from school. Ned, are you still here? Way back there. Okay, thanks, Ned. And to film, he's been filming as well. And DJ, you here, DJ? Photographer? There he is. This is DJ. He's a photographer. And thank you all for being here to record this momentous day. Thank you all for being here too. So, our final student speaker is Harlan Quintana, a junior at Santa Fe Indian School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He worked to pass the first resolution in New Mexico and has worked with members of Congress from the House and the Senate to promote discussions on climate solutions. He'll be speaking on his experiences with environmental inequality and climate neglect. Thank you.
Before I start, I'd like to thank all of you guys for being here. It's a really good thing that, what you're doing. All right. Hello, my name is Harlan Quintana and I'm from Coach D. Pueblo. I attend the Santa Fe Indian School and I'm a junior. My Pueblo and my people have been stewards of the land for millennia. We are a farming society and we plan to provide for our families. And we plan to keep our culture alive. Climate change is real and it's happening now. Being as close to nature as we are, we can see it firsthand and up close. We see the timing of the seasons changing. We're seeing longer winters and shorter planting seasons, making it hard for our farmers to provide for their families. We're also seeing the monsoon season become more intense and harsh. What was once seen as a blessing now washes away our seedlings and our crops. Even in typical times of rainfall, that moisture doesn't last long in the soil. The extreme heat dries up the soil so fast that the plants aren't able to draw in the moisture to grow. Climate change isn't just affecting the plants where I live, it's also affecting the wildlife. We can see migratory birds not leaving for the winter and staying during the winter and freezing. We're seeing bears in our mountains not hibernating, and this is a big problem. Climate change needs to be addressed, and we can call on Congress to make change. We are not separate from nature. We are taught that the earth is our mother and that we need to protect her. Thank you.
And yesterday Harlan told us a story about the hummingbirds who had come back early thinking it was springtime, and then they had a freeze and it froze. That was really a very upsetting story. So thank you for sharing. Our last expert presenter is focusing on the school board member perspective. Devin Del Palacio is a trustee of Tolleson Union High School District and the chair-elect of the Black Council of the National School Boards Association. He is a human services graduate of Rio Salado Community College and obtained a constitutional law certificate from Yale University. He is also the founder of PHX United, which organizes community service programs for at-risk youth. He'll be looking at the way climate change impacts educational, equity, finances, and infrastructure. And Devin, come on up. Devin, I had the pleasure of having dinner with Devin last night, and I was really amazed because when he found out about Schools for Climate Action, it was what, a week, Devin? A week? In a week, he got these major organizations to sign on. So you're going to talk about that, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Devin.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's try that again. I said good morning. Good morning. Guys, I'm excited to be here, and it's mainly because of all of you. Now, I will say that my emotions are mixed. You know, it's easy to get frustrated and feel kind of down about some of the challenges that face us, but with the look around, look at the person sitting next to you. You guys are the change agents. This is your movement, this is your time, and it starts now. You see, there's no age limit to when you can start to affect change. For instance, the co-director for this organization, Jonah, is only 16 years old. 16 years old. And so just imagine what you all can do if we come together around one common issue. Now, I'll say that it's amazing how I got to be here in this position. Just 3 weeks ago, someone reached out to me on Facebook, Kimberly over there in the back, by the way, Kimberly, reached out on Facebook and said, hey, I have this great thing I think you'd be interested in. Can you call me about climate change? I said, of course, absolutely. And that's where she introduced me to Park, a 6th grade teacher who had an idea around approaching school boards to adopt resolutions about addressing this issue. And within a week of our conversation, I took the resolution to the National Black Council of School Board Members, and we had a discussion, and we passed it. We passed it. We passed it. So, well, the vote was unanimous. So the council is representative of school board members from all across the nation, some from the communities in which you live in. And so it was a very big deal. And as Park said, that this afternoon, the National School Board Association will be voting on that same resolution. And the way we can get them to do that is by engaging with our elected officials. Just for a show of hands, how many of you actually know what a school board member does? Show of hands. Okay, you can keep it real in this room, we're family. All right, good. See, and that's okay. But I'm gonna go ahead and just let you know, it's gonna be a brief civics lesson on school board members. So school board members are charged with looking out for our students and our schools within our community, representing parents and even those without children. They manage the budget, they vote on curriculum, so things you learn in the classroom, and they discuss and vote on items such as teacher pay, hiring more teachers, opening new schools. And so when it comes to public education and public schools, these folks, school board members, are your representatives. So I'm gonna give each and every one of you some homework. When you get home, you get online, go to your district website and research who are your school board members. Send them an email, connect with them. I'm sure they would love to hear from you. Because just like the Congress folks, there's people out there representing certain interests. And sometimes it might not be in your best interest. And don't forget, all these elected officials that you see today and you hear from, we work for you. We work for you. You're the boss. The folks sending it back to parents in this room today that accompany their children, the teachers here, you guys are the bosses. You gotta speak up. Speak up, step up so we can drive some of this change that we're talking about here today. Now, I'm not gonna go into much detail about some of the effects because we heard from several experts that spoke on the mental health effects of this, the physical effects and the nature of climate change, but I will say that it does have a significant impact on our school structure, especially when you have 500-year floods happening every year. It's hard to keep up with those. It's hard to repair our buildings. For example, it costs just $5 million to repair, or to do any sort of upgrades for our performing arts center. So imagine the cost it would take to repair some of these classrooms from heavy rains and fires, and floods. And in my opinion, we shouldn't have to choose between textbooks or classrooms, transportation or teacher pay. And so we do call on Congress to step up and help us out with funding, but we can't do it alone. School board members can't do it alone. We need everyone in this room to be involved and come together on this issue. As you heard from several people today, your voice matters. And so I also like to just note that sometimes we forget that this issue can be very partisan, and it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be. This isn't a Democratic issue, a Republican issue. This is an American issue that affects all of us, all of us. And so because I'm a good elected official, I always keep around my handy pocket constitution, and I'm gonna just read the most important part of that document, which is a preamble. I'm gonna focus on 4 words within the preamble. So it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for a common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now there's 4 words in that preamble that all of us should pay attention to, especially our congressional members. And that is, promote the general welfare. Promote the general welfare. That's what we must do. That's the oath we took to defend and protect the Constitution. And so that should be all the proof and the pudding that we need to move forward. Now, I will say that there are some serious effects. So I'm from a very hot place called Phoenix, Arizona. And if you've ever been, you understand those summers can be brutal. Sometimes 110 degrees, 112 degrees. They say it's a dry heat, and they're lying to you because you're sweating and you're very wet. Now, the more disturbing piece of this is that they say my city, Phoenix, by 2050 could be inhabitable. It's up for debate on whether the nation's 5th largest city and one of the fastest growing cities in the entire nation is going to be inhabitable. It's alarming. And that's scary. What happens to the millions of people who live within our city? What happens to the millions of children who attend schools? The millions of families who are working hard to provide for their children. And so it is upon us on how to start to drive this change. So how do we get there? Some solutions. Well, one of them is, like I mentioned earlier, engaging with your elected officials, because change starts local. Okay, I'm gonna say it again. Change starts local.
Change.
No, go ahead. Right here. Say it. What did I say? Go ahead.
Change starts. That's right.
Okay, all together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Change starts local. That's right. And that's how we're going to turn this thing around. Get to know your school board members. Get to know your city council folks, your mayors. They're the ones in your backyard that can make this happen tomorrow. And also, let's not ignore the fact that change starts with the ballot box. Change starts with the ballot box. I like this. This is great. All together. 1, 2, 3. Change starts with the ballot box. That's right. And so when y'all turn 18, you make sure you get registered to vote. Because if we want more elected officials like the ones you saw here today that support our issues, then you guys need to vote. We all need to vote as a community to ensure that we have the representation that we want and that we deserve to have. With that, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Robert F. Kennedy, who once said that we must recognize the full human equality of all of our people before God, before the law, and then the councils of government. We must do this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God command it, although they do, not because the people in other lands wish it so. We must do it for the single and fundamental reason that it is just the right thing to do. Let's go out there and make change. Thank you.
And I want to thank one more very important person who actually was the most, I'd say the biggest organizer behind this day, and that was our Young Voices for the Planet Outreach Coordinator, Kimberly Gutzler. Kimberly, can you please stand up? Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for bringing us all together.
All right, so today we also have a very special guest, Dahlia Palchik is here. Yeah, right there, one of the Fairfax County trustees. So that's great that she is here. Is Jessica Suter here as well?
Any other trustees?
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dahlia. So with that, we're going to head out nice and orderly to the steps. We're going to take a group photo. We're going to have another activity. And then you guys are all going to head out and you're going to collectively visit every single member of the House of Representatives. 435. Hang on, be seated for one.